What could or should be the repercussions for UFC President Dana White after he allegedly hit his wife? YouTuber and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu master Steven Williams gets into it. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. UFC President Dana White has been in the conversation recently, and that is because White was captured on video allegedly slapping his wife, Ann. Now, I'm going to give everybody a little bit more context here. This happened at a nightclub in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico on New Year's Eve. And in the video, it appears that White says something to his wife, grabs her wrists, and then she hits him. And then he immediately responds back by slapping her. And then those around the two seemingly try to move them apart. Now, Dana White has addressed this encounter publicly.
There's never an excuse. I'm sure you guys have read some of the same stuff that I've seen. There's no defense for this, and people should not be defending me over this thing, no matter what. All the criticism that I have received this week is 100% warranted and will receive in the future.
And his wife even issued a statement which says, quote, Dana and I have been married for almost 30 years. To say this is out of character for him is an understatement. Nothing like this has ever happened before. Unfortunately, we were both drinking too much on New Year's Eve, and things got out of control on both sides. We've talked this through as a family and apologized to each other. I just hope people will respect our privacy for the sake of our kids. Now, at the time of this recording, there have been no legal or career repercussions for Dana White, and there's definitely been debate about what should be done here, from ESPN analysts chiming in.
There's a level of accountability that people are craving for.
Yeah.
But who's going to exact that accountability? I don't know the answer to that question.
It needs to be Endeavor, because he has a boss.
Okay.
And it has to be more severe from the simple fact that he's in a leadership role. He's the face of the company, and what comes with that.
To even those in the MMA world, like fighter Dustin Poirier.
You should never put your hands on a woman. I don't know. I don't know the repercussion that comes along with somebody at his stature running these businesses and doing something like that. I have no clue.
But what could be done or what should be done is the question. So let me bring in right now Steven Williams from the popular YouTube channel Steven Strangles People. Steven holds an undefeated record in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at the black belt level, and he has produced champions in MMA, BJJ across multiple organizations, and he knows the ins and outs of the MMA and UFC world. Steven, thanks so much for coming here on Sidebar.
Thanks for having me.
So there have been no, at the time of this recording, legal repercussions for Dana White. I'm curious what you think about that at this point. Do you think something should be done or could be done? Let's start there.
Well, the question is, what would get done? If it was a legal repercussion, it would have to come from his wife. And we've now heard that that's not going to be the case, right? His wife is not going to press charges. From what I've heard, they've been together since they were in high school. So I feel like if that's happened once, now this is just purely speculative, but it's probably happened before on some level, some sort of physical altercation. So she's been with him for a long time through the ups and downs. I don't see any legal repercussions happening. Now, if you ask what should happen,
well, maybe I'll just jump in. Jump in right there to talk the law for a second. So my understanding under a brief, remember this happened in Mexico, right?
Yeah.
So my understanding under Mexican law is that it's really dependent upon the alleged victim to file a report and make a statement. And if that doesn't happen, which I haven't seen any evidence that Ann White has actually reported on her husband or filed a police report, this case basically, just dropped. Nothing really happens here. Again, the details are private. We're not 100% sure what's happening behind the scenes. But if there's, no circumstance where Dana White is arrested in Mexico, we'll know why. You can take it from there.
Correct. And there's a layer above that which goes, well, what should happen to Dana in regards to his position as UFC president? Should he be stripped of that? Should he be fired? Should there be some sort of, I've heard people say it should be like a 30-day respite where he's not allowed to work. And I don't know. I mean, it's been a tricky road because most of the fighters have kind of kept quiet about it for obvious reasons. I think a lot of them don't want to be implicated in this muddy, weird, very personal thing that has happened with Dana. And a few fighters, as you said, like Dustin Poirier, has openly said, like, this, it's disgusting what has happened. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but it's not great what he's done. But yeah, what would happen? Should he just step down? I don't know if you saw the interview. He did a presser last weekend.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
He jumped in and said, "What do you think the repercussions should be?"
What should the repercussions be? You tell me. I take 30 days off. How does that hurt me? I mean, I told you guys when we were going through COVID could last 10 years. I could set it out and, you know what I mean? What would be the problem? The only, it's much like COVID, actually. You know, me leaving hurts the company, hurts my employees, hurts the fighters.
So he basically says that if he were to step down or anything happens, it's going to hurt the UFC. It's going to hurt the fighters. It's going to hurt the company. Is that what everybody wants? Do you agree with him on that?
No, I don't. I mean, I listen. Dana White's done incredible things for the sport. I'm grateful for what he's done. You know, he's helped bring this to the level that it is. But to say that it can't exist without him at the helm is absolutely. I mean, it's ego based, right? It's like I've done this, so if I don't continue doing it, it'll fail. But it's a machine now. There's many people working. There's a lot of people that are doing various jobs that he used to do on his own. Yeah, it's a multi-billion-dollar company. So do I think he needs to be there for it to be successful? Absolutely not. But, you know, he doesn't want to let go of his identity, his fame.
Well, what about him stepping away for a little bit, like a 6-month suspension? Does that matter at all?
I mean, who does it? I mean, what would be the point? I mean, I think he either goes away forever, which would be like the ultimate, like, okay, he disrespected his wife, disgusting, okay, he has to go away. But 60 days or 6 months or 30 days or 2 minutes, it's like, what's the point of that? What happens then?
The UFC doesn't have a domestic violence policy, right? I mean, what has happened in the past with other fighters who've gotten in trouble for similar incidents?
There was an issue with Greg Hardy, former football player. I believe he played in the NFL, if I'm not mistaken. And he was in a pretty public situation where he hit a woman. And I mean, he was getting fights every other week almost. I mean, he was constantly getting put out for a fight. So, you know, I don't think the UFC is that strict on situations where domestic violence is occurring.
Well, what do they usually do in those circumstances? And do you think that there should be a domestic violence policy instituted at the UFC?
I mean, obviously, there has to be something put down that would. There has to be repercussions to bad behavior. Otherwise, it just permeates. It just keeps going. But yeah, in the past, fighters that have had issues with domestic abuse or alleged domestic abuse have been able to flourish. A lot of times, you'll just see it get brushed under the rug. You know, it's not something that really is demonized publicly in the sport.
Well, Endeavor is the one that took a majority ownership in UFC, right? And don't they have some responsibility here?
I would think so. I mean, again, the game has changed a few years ago with Zuffa stepping down and Endeavor coming in. So, and, you know, they're Hollywood, right? Hollywood's super progressive and super, you know, don't hit women, which is all great. So you would think that would be implicated or rather implemented in MMA, but in the UFC, but I don't see that happening as of yet. Maybe this is sort of the moment, the turning point where it becomes more of a thing, right? It had to happen at this scale for it to become a problem.
Do you think there's been enough attention put on it? Because there has been criticism levied at certain media organizations. You're not following the story as much as you should be.
Agree 100%. I think the initial influx of news that I was reading on Twitter was he handled it well. I mean, TMZ, I can't remember TMZ's headline. I just remember looking at it and going, that's a strange take. Like, why aren't you calling him? You call people out for things far less egregious in ways that are far more sensational, titles that are way more sensationalized. But for this, I mean, this is the story of the year for MMA. I mean, this guy, right? You would think this would be blown up, but it was really not. And I find that interesting. Maybe it's his relationships with these various outlets. I don't know.
I'm not justifying in any way, but do you think it's complicated because he, from what I saw, he grabs her wrist first, but then she hits him and then he slaps her back. Is it complicated? It's not so straightforward because they might be looking while they're both drunk. She was physical with him. He was physical with her. Is that why people, aren't, coming out clearer against this?
I think so. I think in MMA specifically, I can't speak. I think maybe humans in general, but certainly I've been in the world of MMA for a long time. And I think, none of us support hitting a woman ever, right? Ever. Unless she's coming at you with a gun or a knife, but never under any circumstance. But there was a feeling watching it like, well, no one's bringing up the fact that she slapped him, right? Like that, at least bring it up. I'm not saying, because the thing is, two things can be wrong. She slapped him and he slapped her. They're both wrong things, but I think each person should take responsibility on some level for what they did. And so yeah, that could be a factor, but I still think there's something cooking in terms of like his relationships with different outlets. That's my
Okay, so let's say nothing happens to him. He's not arrested. He's not suspended. He doesn't get a dock and pay of some kind. You and I mentioned maybe they should have write a domestic violence policy in the UFC. What about him being mandated to go to a counseling program? What about the UFC, having some sort of partnership with a domestic violence survivor group, making it more vocal? Do you think anything like that could be a possibility?
I mean, you have great ideas. Maybe you
Well,
should
I'll
work
tell
for
you
the
what,
UFC.
they're not my ideas. I actually looked online about what
Okay.
potential, repercussions there could be, and I don't know. It sounded good to
Yeah, I think
me.
they're great ideas. I think anytime you shine a light on something and you start to acknowledge it as being something that's real, like we're going to give money to this cause or whatever the case may be. The physical act of doing it is cool, but I think shining a light on it in a bigger way is going to have an even bigger effect. So yeah, on some level, I think those will all be great ideas and things that Endeavor should consider at least.
All right, Stephen Williams, thank you so much. Tell everybody where they can find you.
Steven Strangles People on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and Steven Strangles on Twitter.
Now, this is a true crime podcast. This is not you actually going out and strangling people. This is
No.
your masterclass of jiu-jitsu, and I've seen your work, and it's very impressive. So, Stephen, thanks for taking the time. And that's all we have for you here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.